Top of the morning to you. Welcome to the Accountability Forum.
I think we're working with
from Martini
now.
Mornings, and I have with me the formidable Dr.
I'll do an introduction and then we'll talk.
He is a medical doctor. He is an activist. He is a politician, and he's going to give us some answers today. I hope.
I'll do a little
some
very
tricky questions.
To stop
here. We've got a bit to cover today because there's a lot of people that need to be held account. There's the casino corruption. Surprise, surprise. Angus Taylor has made an absolute debacle. Will it be talked about in the with the budget coming up? I want to talk budget with you as well, Arthur. Welcome aboard. How are you this morning?
Excellent, Martine. Bit of technical problems there. Nice to get through at the end, eh?
Goodness me. It's always a challenge, but look, here we are chatting away. So I want to know if you can help us unravel, dissect the absolute mess that most of us see of the budget. Should we just put our heads in the sand and pretend it's not happening, and then just vote for the person handing out the best and easiest how to vote form at the upcoming election? Or do we need to be worried about some of the things that have been promised, or perhaps we're not actually hearing the full story?
Well, you want the short, cynical version?
Tell me.
My view is, look, the government came to this last election, they had no policies except, be scared of Labor and be scared of tax cuts and be scared of losing your franking credits and be scared of...
Axe the tax, wasn't that the big one coming into the...
Yeah, well, they accused Labor of going to do all sorts of things, and Labor was confident and had lots of policies, so they made a scare campaign on their policies, and they didn't have any policies. Well, that's what they've implemented, no policies, right? So, but they have got pork barreling to a new level. Now, if you're like me and you like world records, greatest tennis player of all time, most goals in the AFL or whatever, let's say the most promises with the least delivered, we're right out there here. So this government's really been very good at doing nothing, I think, but the misuse of money has been incredible, I think. Buying submarines and things, throwing money at coalition electorates, buying water from mates. It's been really bad management, I think.
Yes.
And never being there when the bushfires and the floods came, and never having a plan, never having anything advanced, and not even being able to hand out money to the people who were burnt out or flooded out. Absolutely. And now we're giving money to everybody. You know what I mean? You go online, you get $250 for, or you get $400 tax return and so on. It's all snouts in the trough, all within 7 weeks for some reason. I don't know why that's 7 weeks. It's funny, isn't it, that the election has to be by the end of May? Just figure out how many weeks that is.
How cynical you are, Ace.
Well, I mean, I think it's never been more justified. And I think the idea that they're better economic managers is simply complete nonsense. I mean, it's just a mantra that gets stated on the assumption they're all lefties. Lefties can't manage money because they're really just workers. It's a real class sneer, I think, and an elitism that's certainly not justified by the facts.
But how is this going to affect me and the average Joe around the corner here when it comes to budget time, when it comes to taxes? I mean, we are getting $200 here and there, fabulous. But Angus Taylor, in his debacle with this carbon, carry-on, has us now as taxpayers really footing a bill of $3.5 billion.
Hang on, you asked two questions, one of which I didn't answer before, and then the one about Angus Taylor. The first one is, what should we do about the budget, right? Now, I would say that this latest thing is very liberal. You don't actually deal with the problems of what they are, the fact that, the cost of living is going out of whack and the wages are not fixed and the poor people can't afford things. You just give them a big whack of money now, right? You don't deal with the problem at all. You kick it down the road. You just give them some money now in the next 7 weeks before the elections, and they say, gee, those government gave us some money now, I'm much better off, right? Now, this is...
You know what? I actually did that with my child with an ice cream. I shoved an ice cream at her just to shut her up for 2 minutes.
And it worked.
It works. It does work.
Yeah,
To be honest.
Yeah, what's the point? It's very liberal. It works. You give them something now, an ice cream, like a kid, and if enough kids are happy with their ice creams, they can get through the election, right? That's what it comes down to, really. So, I mean, if you ask me,
yeah, they're too busy.
What your response should, if you ask me what your response should be, I'd say, have as much ice cream as you can right now. Don't even think that the Liberals are going to fix the problem. Have the ice cream now, because Labor's not going to oppose it, because, you know, it's populism at its worst. Take your ice cream now and vote them out as soon as you can. You know, that would be that's what I'm going to do. I mean, I'm going to get 2 or 3, 6 months of cheaper petrol. They could have used that to subsidise electric cars, but hey, you know, but people haven't got electric cars, and that would have been a subsidy to relatively rich people, I guess.
It's totally relevant.
It would have lessened the national demand for fuel, of course. So in the long term, it would have been part of a solution. But anyway, that's what's happening. That's a good example. The other thing I'd say is that the Herald ran with the headline, whack it on the tab, right? Which effectively meant they were giving an opinion on the front page, which was, you know, it's all just borrowed money being given to you now. But the telly ran with the headline, it's a working class plan. So I wondered if that means Murdoch is going to be a bit more pro-liberal. Because I always feel when you look at the Murdoch press, I think to myself, how does this help Murdoch's business?
Oh, absolutely. That's how you have to every turn.
Whichever government will favour his business,
yes,
is the one he says is good. It's got nothing really to do with any other policies that they have. And generally, they've been happy to let him gobble up all the media rivals, so that he's a monopoly. And because they're happy to do that, they support them. And I think that was why they got rid of the Rudd government. The two things that got rid of the Rudd government were he upset the media by not allowing extension by Murdoch at buying other entities, and he wanted to bring in a mining resource rental tax, which is sort of like the big superannuation fund in Norway, where the national resources that are sold, oil particularly, go into a fund for the country for the long term, and they've got trillions of dollars from what was taxed. So the two things, and Murdoch plus the mining magnates got rid of the Rudd government. So you've got to recognise the power of the media and then wonder what will happen this election. Will Murdoch favour the Liberals? Because they are, of course, by far the most powerful media organisation in the country. And if the Liberal government's to have any hope at all, they will need the Murdoch press. So what the Murdoch press does is pretty critical. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we talk about, you know, having an ice cream to shut you up or to get you over the line in the election. What's very appealing to me as a single mum is the promise of a 2% deposit home loan. I mean, how can you not go past that, Arthur?
Well, of course, the aspirational voters are the ones who are seen as determining who wins, right? People who want houses are highly aspirational, and there's a lot of them, you know, younger people, getting older now, it just takes so long to get a house. But, you know, they're people who work hard, save their money and try to get a house. But it's like chasing, see, while they've got negative gearing, I think negative gearing is a Ponzi scheme, right? We all get tax benefits, and then we pay less tax, and then the tenant pays, and all we do is pay the interest, and then the house goes up in value and we do really well, right? But the person, when we sell, we make a fortune, but where does that money come from? Well, the buyer borrows it, right?
Yes.
So it's a Ponzi scheme. The buyer borrows the money and they just have to borrow much more. My house has gone up 10 times from when I bought it, right? 10 times. And people say, oh, you're very rich. And I say, well, it's still the same house.
Yes.
You know, it's funny money, really. But if I sold it, someone else would have to stump it up, right? Now, of course, the kids can't stump it up. We've all had easy money I bought my house in 1992 or something. And it's very easy money. I've done nothing to get 10 times the value of it.
Yes.
But anyone who buys it is looking at serious money. And of course, our banks borrow from foreign banks. So it becomes private foreign debt. And then they say, well, there's no money in Australia to invest in our industries. Well, why is that? Because we're paying a fortune in interest to foreign banks because of our crazy negative gearing scheme. Now, when Labor suggested last election to get rid of it, they said, oh, they'll take away your houses, oh, we'll take away negative gearing, it's an easy way of making money, blah, blah, blah. But it's a Ponzi scheme and it's very bad for the nation, right? So to give
not only that, it was actually put to us as a community as well, was that if that the scheme is then dissolved, that us poor people renting would have no homes. So,
that was the idea, but how come there's still, but there's still not enough homes, despite all that. As in the old days, the government didn't give out the huge tax concessions for negative gearing. If they'd used that same amount of money that they gave out in tax concessions to build houses, hey, there'd be a lot of public housing, wouldn't there?
Absolutely.
So this idea that, that all these negative gearing people are playing Santa Claus, mostly they're buying existing housing stock and watching them go up.
Okay, so
now,
we are in a housing crisis on a number of levels. People are having to buy cheap, live in cheap, just to put a roof over their head. They're building and buying places in flood-prone areas that have been evacuated as we speak because of the housing crisis. You've very well explained to us how that is funded and how that is then from international funds. Putting a roof over our head, as a psychologist looking at it from Maslow's hierarchy, we have to put a roof over our head before we can become aspirational to anything else. That's very appealing to us in the budget and for us in the next election. What are some of the other issues that we should be wary of, that we're not being sold an ice cream?
Well, where do I start? I mean, I suppose climate change is the one that a lot of the independents are working on. And of course, as you were asked me about Angus Taylor.
Yes.
Who's sort of the minister for Rorting or whatever it is. I mean, he's the guy who bought a whole lot of water licenses from a company he was associated with, for millions of dollars, and that company was going under. Now he's in charge of this emissions reduction fund. And there was a very big article in last week's Saturday paper.
Yes.
The guy who had set the fund up, I mean, he's not some wild, crazy lefty. He was a guy called Professor Andrew McIntosh. And he said that basically they are paying for trees that were there already,
yes,
or building forests in areas that can never be forests,
yes,
and getting money for energy from landfill when they would have got the methane from the landfill anyway, whether there was a subsidy or not. So they're just getting their snacks.
Farmers are getting money per tree that's on their property for not cutting it down. That's the basic premise of it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just become an absolute rort for his mates. And this professor's wanting an inquiry into it with witnesses compelled to give evidence. That's really saying, they've got to tell the truth on oath with a QC taking strips off them, in order to get to the truth of what's happening, which is really, really bad. I mean, and this is the guy who set it up. This is not some, crazy lefty environmental critic or something, because they always have a go at the credentials of critics.
Yes.
They never say, well, you might be right. So, this is just part of the whole rot, I think, of a very decadent government that doesn't, and I think they've given up governing for everybody. They govern for the people who elected them. And that's a very dangerous trend, really. I mean, the Australian government has to be the Australian government for all Australians, not for the people that elected me, and especially the ones who are critical for electing me, which is the marginal seat people. So all the policies are directed to the marginal seat people, and the people who are in blue ribbon seats, they get a little bit of slush if they're our blue ribbons, and if they're the other side and we can't ever get them, tough luck. And all the hard decisions get pushed down, whether it's negative gearing or whether it's climate change or whether it's moving people off floodplains. I mean, if you're going to move people off floodplains, you're going to have to move Lismore, really. You're going to have to think about Grafton. You're going to make huge changes in Western Sydney where there's huge areas that are prone to floods. And you're going to have to say, look, we're going to have high rise near the railway stations on the higher areas. That might be the best thing to do. Now, that's going to require a big change and a bit of courage to do it. But how often are we going to have these places flooded?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There are so many levels and peels of this onion. I mean, how many developers are going to squish through all of those issues with councils and local government and state government to actually buy floodplains and develop not just a property but estates of cheap housing that we all desperately need, because the costs of housing is just so outrageous and inflated.
Well, negative gearing's done this, really. The gap between wages and house prices has just gone. I mean, when I bought my first house, it was about 2.5 times my salary.
Yes.
So I mean, now it's 10 times your salary. So it's gone up in real terms 4 or 5 times. And that's,
yes.
I mean, you're talking sort of lifetimes of work here to try and pay this off. And I mean, this is pretty daunting when you think I'm going to have to come up with all this money just because somebody else got a negative gearing advantage for, a few years. I'm paying that off. And I feel the older generation has dudded the younger one, in a sense. We've dudded it. We're all very rich because they have to borrow money to give to us. Right. So when we sell out, when we retire or whatever, we retire really rich, but they have to pay it. So in a way, it was always a Ponzi scheme. And this idea, it's just a good way of making money. It was only a good way of making money because of the way the tax thing was structured.
And so many people did benefit from it going up.
Well, of course, everybody who owned a house did. So I mean, that's why they've never been game to tackle it. But I think they're going to just have to grandfather the ones that are there and stop it for the future. That would seem to me to be what's necessary. And I think even that's what Shorten was suggesting last election. Albanese hasn't been game to say anything because I think the problem is now negative campaigning is so much more powerful than positive campaigning. If you said 10 positive,
yes.
you said a positive thing 10 times, and I said, you're a bit dodgy once, people would believe me. You know what I mean? So in a sense, it's very hard to be positive. And so everyone's now negative. And if you don't want to get negative, you don't say anything, right? And that's what Labor's done. So we have to hope that when the time comes, they've got the courage to do something. And I think the fact that the vested interests are so powerful with the political parties is why people are saying we're sick of all political parties, we'll give the independents a go. And certainly where I am, that's been a big thing. And I think it will be a big thing in quite a number of significant areas this election.
There's a lot of problems, though, with independents that they don't have the backing infrastructure of the big parties. Does that play a part in, Joe Blow around the corner here continually voting in the Labor or Liberal simply because they have got that infrastructure rather than feeling that they're taking a risk on the independents?
I think people may have that perception. When I was in Parliament, one of the things I did, whenever I met somebody who seemed to know what they were talking about, and I mean, you wander around meeting people, that's your job, and you talk to them. And if I had someone who was savvy, I would say, give me your card, and I'd write on the back of it, tall, skinny, frizzy hair with glasses, met at such and such, knows about this, right? And I'd write down the words that they knew something about, right? And then when I got back to the office, I'd put them in the database, right? So when I had a problem that I didn't know what to do, I would say to that person, I can remember I met this person in Tamworth, who I thought, she's pretty savvy, she knows what's going on. And the government brought in this legislation that instead of paying disabled people an amount, they'd pay it to the institution they were in instead.
Yes.
And this came on in the morning, was to get voted on in the afternoon, which is super fast, right? Which looked like a Swiftie, right? Something's going on. So I thought, So at lunchtime, I looked up the thing and it said, tall, skinny lady, frizzy hair, met in Tamworth, knows about disabled funding, right? So I rang the number and the lady said, I can't hardly hear you. I'm between Dubbo and Burke. If you just give me 10 minutes, I'll get to the top of the next hill and the reception will be better, right? So I said,
literally
right.
The back of Burke.
Literally the back of Burke. And I said, okay, I'll ring you back in 10 minutes. So I rang her back in 10 minutes. She said, why are you asking me? I'm not very high up the tree. And I said, but you know what's going on and you won't bullshit me because you're not high up the tree. You're going to give me an honest answer. I said, why is this? And she said, there's a whole lot of people who've been, developmentally delayed who are in school, and they're all going to come out of school, and it's going to put up the cost of paying them individually a lot more. Whereas if the money's been given to the institutions, they can give out the same amount of money to the institutions, and there'll be less per person. Get it?
Absolutely.
And I said, yep, I get it. So I stood up in Parliament and said, this is what's going on, team. And the Liberals, who were the opposition at that time, Labor was in, they were gobsmacked. How did you find that out? Now, this idea that the parties can find things out and have things much better sorted, they can't. They're like dinosaurs. They can't dance. You know what I mean? If you're savvy and you want to find out something these days, you just have to have, you've got to collect the contacts systematically so you know who to ask. You can't you can Google it.
And network as well.
You've got to have people and trust in each area, and think about, if I have questions in this area, who will I ask? Set up a framework. But that doesn't take, a lot of people want to help you, and some of them you can trust, and you set up a network, and then when you have a problem, you go there. So this idea that independents can't do anything, that wasn't I reckon I could toe to toe on ministers with very little time to get the act together, for that reason. So this idea of independents are just poor little lambs out there.
Yes.
The main reason we don't have so many independents is because the voting system stacked against them with preferences.
I think that would be something that we could and should talk about at another stage, actually, so that people actually understand how their vote doesn't count, and that we need to be quite vigilant. But you've given us a brilliant overview of just a very minute, huge iceberg of problems here. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Can we chip away at it again next week?
Sure can. Nice to talk to you.
Fabulous talking to you, Arthur. And look, I know you've got lots of support to get back up as an independent, and we'd encourage you to do so. You're a mountain and a wealth of knowledge, and it's been absolutely lovely chatting to you. And, we've got to keep these people accountable. So thank you to people like yourself who are doing that for us. So thanks so much for joining us, Arthur, and we'll chat with you next week on another fabulous topic of politics and current affairs.
Thanks, Martine. You're doing well.
Thanks.